Welcome to Locking In on Security with Havoc Shield. Today's installment is called Security as a Team Sport. It sure would be nice if CTOs and CIOs could just snap their fingers and harden the company's entire cybersecurity perimeter, but unfortunately, that's not quite the case. Savvy technology leaders set the tone, the framework, the processes, the tools, all to enable the company to maintain a strong cyber perimeter. But ultimately, it takes all the players on the team to win the security game. We're very pleased today to be joined by Phil Salgado, Chief Technology Officer of the KnowFully Learning Group. Phil has built quite the reputation for rallying teams over the years, and not just on the security front, on all types of company-wide initiatives where the culture and the tone is what sets the stage for team members to understand and buy into the overall strategy. Phil, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Phil, maybe we could just start by talking about what it's like to be a CTO in this time period where so many employees are working remotely. If I contrast and compare what life was like as a CTO many years ago versus today, it feels like today is an era where a culture of teamwork is really what makes any technology initiative go smoothly. Especially when we can't just gather everyone together in the big conference room to have that meeting. Is it right to think that the culture of teamwork has become even more essential since the beginning of the COVID era?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've always thought that the best technology and the best technology solutions came from collaboration. They don't occur inside of a vacuum. You don't do architecture where one person is in a sealed off room by themselves. You have to work as a team. It's where in my career, especially earlier on in my career, I found so much fun with things like pair programming. And even as I moved into architecture, getting into a room and just whiteboarding, popping into somebody's office and saying, hey, I want to talk about this. Let's draw it. It might look like a scene out of A Beautiful Mind. And, I think you come up with some really cool things, but it's also what's so much fun about what we do for a living.
That is, sitting in front of a whiteboard and just having it filled with sketches and designs and wireframes and diagrams, and you're sitting there and you're with the team and you're kind of working through issues. That sort of feel of the pre-COVID era. I mean, I know and love that feel, but you say it carries on just with different technologies in this new world.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. I think it's an adjustment, but one thing I'm really fortunate about is that over the last, I would say 6-7 years, I've really started to work with a lot of co-located teams. So whether that's talking about onshore, offshore teams, whether that's people who are scattered around the US and abroad, and really as I moved out of kind of the massive company stage of my career and more into mid-sized type firms, what I found is that we had a lot of locations. So even when we're not talking about offshore resources and we're just talking about in US development and product people, nobody was located in the same place anymore. So you wind up having video calls and you communicate over IM, and I think that's the biggest difference from a collaboration perspective that has made my job a lot of fun. And it has carried on, and it's something as a technology team at KnowFully we've really been able to lean into. It's that we have for years now acquired the best possible talent that we could find and not cared where they were located. And we were able to do that because of technology like Zoom and Slack that really gave more of a personal feel to how we interact, as opposed to when we used to use Skype for Business and when we would use, when we'd get on a stand-up call and there'd just be a phone in the middle of an office, that kind of stuff where people were really just names and occasionally voices, where, now you're able to build personal relationships with people because you can see each other, right?
And it's funny that teams like the ones you've led that were already distributed and already kind of accustomed to the idea that, hey, we're going to be on a Zoom call and maybe a few people might be in the same room together, but we'll be on Zoom, we'll be on Slack, everyone will be interacting. It'll feel like a team, whether you happen to be sitting in the same office as I am or not. I think companies and teams like the ones you've led were kind of ahead of the game and ready for this COVID era, for having a collaborative environment in the COVID era in a way that other companies might not have been.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you saying that, and I certainly like to think so. That but to me, it has, as a manager, it's always come down to the fact that we have to value people for being people, not as tools to accomplish tasks. And
not as resources, not as this resource or that resource.
That's right. Insert whatever cliche you want to throw at whatever jargon, business jargon you want to use to talk about, especially developers.
Yep.
That we're talking about extremely intelligent, highly skilled engineering folks, and these are people that really need to be appreciated and treated for all of the unique personality aspects that they have. And as a team and as a team lead, I've always tried to emphasize the personal aspect of it. Sometimes, like anybody, I'm not in the mood to laugh and joke around. I'm here to get a task done. But a lot of times I err more on the side of, let's mix in a little bit of nonsense into the regular conversation. That, I want to know about you. You should know a little bit about me. And, we should be able to joke, give each other a hard time, goof around a little bit. And then, rein that in. Something that my team has started doing a little bit more recently is that we've got some younger members that haven't seen a lot of movies. So I've got a team member who regularly throws up obscure virtual backgrounds in the Zoom setting in order to see whether or not the rest of the team members can actually guess what the movie is. Like that kind of stuff that just, it's built in and it forces, A, he has to have a little bit of creativity at the start, and B, the rest of the team is joining the call hoping that there's some new background that they haven't seen and they can guess, and then we can tease whoever doesn't know. And all of that really builds that team and fun environment that's not just about accomplishing tasks.
And that's great. And so let's talk about sports, but not just sports. Let's talk about cybersecurity and sports together. So let's go to the idea of security as a team sport, and maybe we can use soccer as an example here. As the CTO, does that make you the goalie? Does that make you the coach? Are you the referee? Or maybe all of these? Phil, what is the role of a CTO in orchestrating the team sport of cybersecurity?
And I love the metaphor. So from my vantage point, if you look at where we were as a group 5 years ago, and you know this well, in the tech sector, we were, even looking inside of a tech department, everybody had defined roles. You had your product people, you had your QA people, you had your developers. The developers were even further subdivided, architecture, there were folks who were working on the front end, the back end, the middle, et cetera. And then you had your sysadmin and your operations team, the people who were responsible for making sure the lights stayed on, to oversimplify the job. And what we've seen over the years inside of the tech group is that those roles have started to blend together, where people aren't just responsible in, I'd say, a very rigid Kanban sense of, I do one task, then I pass it off to someone else, and then pass it off.
The job descriptions that used to look so pristine and clean, that your job starts here and ends here, and this is your box. That's just not the way. That's just not the way of technology teams.
That's right. And with that, what we've seen is that I think that the roles that everybody would identify with have changed over time. And I would, in the past, I probably would think of a product manager as something of a midfielder, someone who's there to be creative, set things up, make other people look good, but probably at times fade into the background a little bit. While I look at some of our architects, some of our front end developers as the flashy goal scoring wing that it's like, this wouldn't exist. We wouldn't win if it wasn't for me.
Yep. Yeah, the emotion of thinking about like a goal, like scoring a goal, and just the level of energy around that, celebrating that.
That's right. And, and really where the front forward product and talent comes from. And you start to understand that, you can look at the sysadmin as somebody who's there kind of as the referee in order to make sure things are operating according to how they're supposed to, but also goalie, last line of defense, make sure that, nope, this code isn't ready to go out. This is going to cause problems. The final way to check, similar to the QA team, serving as your backline defense. But over time, what we've seen is that QA is involved in product design. They're involved in the development process throughout. So are they really the last line of defense, or are they more proactive? The sysadmin, that role has evolved to where you've got tools like infrastructure as code, where from a methodology perspective, developers are functioning as their own sysadmins, and you might not have that dedicated function anymore. So I highlight this because I think inside of a tech group, those roles have started to shift. But that also mimics how things have started to shift around the broader organization, where it used to be if you wanted to put in a piece of software at a company, it didn't matter what its purpose was. It went through the tech team. But now you see, as technology becomes far more commonplace and people become a lot more comfortable, business leaders actually function as technologists or co-technologists in their own discipline.
Sure, especially with the proliferation of no-code and low-code solutions. And things where if you've got a clear vision for what you want, perhaps a landing page to look like, or something like that, that it doesn't necessarily involve what we traditionally thought of as software engineering.
That's right. So what I see really, to kind of go back to where this discussion really started, is that I see that the role of the CTO is really more evolving into a coach, and far less of a referee or a goalie, but those roles do still have to exist, unfortunately, right? But as a coach, understanding that different people around your organization are actually operating under some technology principles, whether that's the agile process now being adopted throughout the business, and you start to see more planning and more forethought going into individual tasks, things that used to only be the domain of the development side of an organization. And then when you talk about how technology is being embedded in these groups, that you might have a marketing group that uses a Monday.com, a development team that uses a Jira, and that's okay, because that's not software that needed to be selected by the development team. But my role as CTO, I definitely see over the years it continuing to evolve, where I'm involved in a lot of those discussions, and I'm helping my peers in the C-suite and other leaders across an organization make the right technology decisions, not necessarily serving as a gate, but saying,
right,
here are some things you might want to think about as you're venturing into how you really empower your groups.
In subtle ways, getting people to think about some of the reasons why the solution they chose might excel in one way, but be not quite what they want in another, but not doing it in sort of a heavy-handed type of way, just kind of coaching and nudging and subtly helping team members kind of find their own way, right?
Exactly. And I think that you really reserve that kind of heavy-handed response, the more referee type approach that I would take to this, where I'm only pulling that red card when we're talking about something that is objectively wrong or objectively right. And I think there's a very narrow place for you to deploy that kind of thinking inside of a business sense. So thinking about things like, hey, I shouldn't use the same password for every single website that I have, or I shouldn't share passwords across people and share licenses. These are things that are bad governance practices.
Sure, and that's a great segue to talking about what types of security initiatives and challenges and issues do you find most need that kind of team collaboration environment? I mean, there are some things that you can just flip a switch and solve. If you want to set up all of your machines to take patches on a certain day or something like that, that's a configuration issue, and maybe involves a little bit of teamwork. But what are some of the cybersecurity issues that you look at and you say, the only way that we can succeed as a team in fending off this type of issue is if everyone's involved, everyone understands what we're doing, why we're doing it, and plays their role?
What do you see in terms of security issues where that's kind of the case?
Yeah, so I see two main pillars to that. I think process and I think education. When I think about how you solve the growing cybersecurity demands of an organization at all sizes, I think about the process that you put in place in order to ensure that everyone knows what their rights and responsibilities are throughout the operation of a business. And I think about education. How do you best and most efficiently serve that particular function inside of the process? That's, again, it's why I think that the coaching role is probably most apt for the CTO. Because in this sense, we're talking about things like working with customer success in order to ensure that when we talk about customers inside of a non-secure setting like an email, that we don't reference PII of a customer.
Sure, and that's going to be really, really hard to police through purely technological means. Right. I'm sure there's someone out there promising that they've got email filters that could catch every possible occasion of PII, but I don't believe it. That's one where the team actually has to believe and understand that that having PII floating around in forwardable emails is a bad idea, and they have to kind of believe that to their core to come along for the ride on that, right?
Absolutely. No, I think you hit the nail on the head there. That's why education is so important. Because education is a function of ensuring that not only does everyone know what their place is inside of an organization and what their responsibilities are in that, but how do they do it? What are the right ways for them to actually accomplish those tasks? And I think that something that we all as leaders need to be conscious of and continue to do a better and better job of is making sure that we don't just tell our team what they have to do. And it's easy for us to give a process because we know this is what the process is going to be. This is what the right process is. We know that PII shouldn't be floating around in unencrypted formats unless it's absolutely necessary. But why? We don't always take the time in order to explain exactly why it's a problem. And
that permeates all kinds of areas of security issues. I mean, even thinking about things like an employee who might have the same password on several different third-party sites. Really and truly, that probably is a case of an employee that that it has not occurred to that employee that when there's a breach on one particular site, that could expose their account and the company on this other site. And that awareness goes a long way towards rallying the team to kind of head the direction that we need them to head, right?
Definitely. And that's where I think incentives come in. And I don't mean, hey, reward people for good behavior. I mean, actually, I'm a product person at heart, right? We both are. And when we think about how we get people, how we get customers potentially to do the things that we believe are right for them and right for businesses we represent, it's no different when we're talking about employees and people that we're leading in an organization. We have to explain to people what it is that we're attempting to accomplish, why it's so important in order to get them to buy into it. And then wherever possible, some of the things that they may think are a little bit more complex or might add more to their time, like having different passwords for a bunch of different websites. We can provide things like password managers to make it really simple for them. And oh, by the way, the incentive there, I think is pretty clear. I don't have to remember a password.
Right.
I love password managers. I would never think about dropping them. It's because I only have to remember one password. And then I can have, I don't know about you, several hundred accounts that I log into that all have unique passwords, that are all managed for me, that handle things like when I need to reset a password for me. And all I have to ever know is one password.
It's interesting because if you think of kind of the naive way of rolling out something like an InfoSec policy in a company that says, you must use a unique password on every site. Here's our password complexity requirements. Here's our handling requirements. That naively rolling out something like that just isn't going to land well in almost any organization. But kind of going through the process of sharing some of the risks that we all take if we don't do that, and then saying, and it's going to be easier for you as well, and we'll give you the password keeper,
And oh, by the way, here's the part of the policies that relate to this. But the important thing is we're all going to stay safe together. We've got the tooling to do it, and it's actually easier to stay safe than it is going the old-fashioned way where we've got passwords in some notepad somewhere.
That's absolutely right. And from a practical perspective, I would say that there are two things that I can almost always count on in an employee at a company. They care about their job, and they care about their fellow employees. Maybe not all of them, but they have personal relationships with at least some of the employee base. They have friends that they want to look out for. So even if you're not talking about people who are at all levels to their core invested in a company, which I think we can all agree is definitely something that we have to sort through as we move into the age where people move between companies more frequently than they used to 20, 30, 40 years ago. But I can almost always rely on the fact that every employee cares about their job. Every employee cares about at least one other person at the company. And with that, you can really reach an audience of, even if it's not the easiest policy, even if it's not the most convenient policy, there are ways to reach the employee base beyond management through fear, right? Because that's what you're alluding to, is that I don't need to introduce a draconian policy to tell you, this is what you have to do, this is how you're going to do it, no exceptions. I can tell you why that's in place. I can treat you like a person, explain to you why it's in place, and rely on some level of self-interest in order to foster adoption.
That's right. That's right. The policy still needs to be there, but the policy is not what rallies the team into action.
That's right. It's no different than a good strategy for how you roll out a product. The strategy needs to be there in place, but it's the buy-in of the entire team in the strategy that really makes it something to behold.
Phil, let's turn to the future. As you think about kind of emerging cybersecurity issues and emerging threats, do you think that we end up moving more towards a world where we're able to button up all of these types of security risks with more and more nuanced systems and configurations? Or do you think that it becomes even more of a team sport where boy, you just got to have that kind of rallying of the team together to head off the issue? Where do you think it heads from here?
Yeah, so I think the evolution we're seeing now is only going to continue to be more stark away from rigid, strict policies and more into a collaboration between business leaders with the CTOs, the CIOs, the CTOs of the world, kind of at the heart of the process. We're in a spot, and I think as an industry, what we do for a living, we're at that inflection point of saying the people who are leading tech groups, and principally, regardless of what you call them, the people who are leading tech groups are not just brilliant technologists. Like, sure, that's somewhat of an expectation or table stakes, if you will, but you have to be business people and coaches first. And you have to think about how other people in the organization are going to view the same things that you view as black and white. The things that you and I would probably agree are objectively right and objectively wrong, other people will view as, gray or shades. And it requires a certain softness. It requires an interpersonal discipline in order to really collaborate with someone who doesn't speak the same language as you. That to really get through to who you're speaking with in order to ensure that you understand where I'm coming from, I understand where you're coming from, and together we're doing what's right for the business, right for each other, and right for our customer base. And that's what it's really all about. That's what leaders at any kind of organization are supposed to be doing.
Phil, we won't ask that you change your business card to say coach, but we will begin to think of the CTO role as something that does have a lot of the same elements that we think of as ones that we see great coaches really exhibit.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Phil. I think in so many ways, the new threat landscape has evolved and changed the way that CTOs engage their teams. And when you think about years ago, when it was maybe good enough to just have that brilliant CTO that understood all the technology, it now is just absolutely incumbent on CTOs to be the cultural leader of the team in terms of the behaviors, the roles, the rationale, the awareness. And I think security as a team sport is here to stay. So thank you, Phil, for joining us for this session of Locking In on Security with Havoc Shield, and stay safe out there.
My pleasure. Thanks.